Welcome to the All In, All Out podcast. My name is Shannon Ross, founder and executive director of The Community. This podcast is focused on the goal of creating a justice system more worthy of that name, and why you, no matter who you are, should care. The name of the podcast refers to the fact that we must be all in and go all out to truly address the way justice is viewed and applied in America. Furthermore, the sense of separation the system imposes is an illusion. What happens to individuals on both sides of the fence is connected and tied to the same fate. How we treat incarcerated people reflects the state and direction of society. Those inside are all out, and those of us outside are all in. As for me, I am no more than a dreamer who knows there is a better way and is devoted to reaching out and holding on even when it is uncomfortable, because connections and empathy are the foundation of the types of strong, healthy communities that we all want. I spent 17 years in the Wisconsin prison system, where I obtained my bachelor's degree in business administration, had several articles published locally and nationally, co-created a mental health program that now exists in several facilities throughout the state, and founded The Community. Upon release at the end of 2020, I obtained my master's degree in sustainable peace building at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, co-founded a successful multi-dimensional justice solutions firm called Paradigm Shift, became a first-time father, and I'm currently a consultant at Marquette University's higher education and prison program. But these achievements have occurred alongside numerous and constant failures. Therefore, I, and however, remain all in and all out. Thank you both for coming today for the podcast. And I think I don't really ever do intros very well, so I tend to just go right through that and go right to getting to the questions. So I'm just going to say today we have two state representatives, Goyke and Dora. And the question I was going to ask, I think, at the beginning of a conversation like this, and a lot of conversations, I think, that have to do with the stressful navigating of the world that you both work in is why you do that. So right now, what energizes you? What is fueling you?
Well, I guess I'll go first. I got into this work because of the work that I did previously. You know, I worked in criminal justice system as a social worker doing pretrial services. So a lot of the clients that I worked with, I still remember their stories. And so when looking at policies and what the impact would be, I always try to put myself in their shoes and what they had to endure while they were going through the justice system. And I also do it for my own family too. You know, I'm the oldest of 8, a large family, and I think it's important that people see that there are people that can be relatable, that care, and that actually want to do great work in politics. And so those are the things that drive me and why I stay at work every day.
Yeah, I would say, you know, it's been over 10 years since I was a lawyer in the justice system. I was a public defender. A lot of memories that stay with me, but you get constantly reminded of similar experiences and similar stories. Last week, on Friday, I had a long conversation with a woman named Grace, who moved out of Wisconsin because her 2006 felony conviction kind of haunted her and she needed to start over, and she did, and she's raising her family and doing great. And now her kind of career trajectory is such that she can't get to be licensed in what she wants to do, which is to be a firefighter, because of this conviction. So we're working on something that I think we may talk about in this podcast of changing Wisconsin law and expunging criminal records. But I use Grace as an example because I think Dora would agree, we are constantly meeting new people and hearing new stories, partially your fault, Shannon, of people that are going through similar circumstances or have similar experiences in the justice system.
Yeah, I don't apologize, but
yeah,
yes. So kind of going from that then, segueing, I think, go in the reverse order since you teed it up, what are you working on now?
Yeah, so we're talking on February 12, 2024. The State Assembly has 2 more weeks of our 2-year cycle or session cycle. And so all legislators are focused on what can we get across the goal line, get to the governor's desk to sign into law. Right now, that focus for me is expungement. It's Assembly Bill 37 this year. We're probably going to vote on it Thursday this week, the 15th of February. We're still struggling to get the votes necessary in the state Senate, so we're like behind the closed doors in the Capitol trying to negotiate with them to get enough Republican senators to support it, to get it across their House, to get it to the governor. And then there are some other bills that we've worked on with what's called a legislative study committee, where legislators and non-elected sit together, and we drafted 4 different bills, and one will be on the floor of the Assembly tomorrow, and we're trying to get earned release expanded and trying to do reentry centers in a different way as one of the bills. Some work to try to increase housing access for people as they come home, and so that focus is just like get those done because we're so close. So it's really not for me a time of creating new ideas, but trying to finish what we started.
Yeah.
And I think actually tease off because there are things that are new that I'm working on, but it's probably going to take a little bit longer because they're just introduced. I was one of the authors to make feminine hygiene products free, for people that are in the correction system. We've heard a lot of the stories of the conditions that people live in, not just in Milwaukee, but across our state. And, as a woman, there are just some things that you shouldn't have to pay for. There shouldn't be additional tax. So that is one bill that I'm a co-author in, and I believe we're still waiting to get a public hearing on that one. But, I think long-term is really doing a deep dive into what supervision looks like. We all know that Wisconsin's known for the worst numbers for mass incarceration, right? And so looking at what it means for people that are currently in supervision and what it means to be rewarded when people are actually doing good, right? If we're serious about people that are going to be coming home, because they will eventually come home, we want to make sure that they actually have a fair shot, and so if that's making sure that they're able to go to work and that counts time off towards the time that they're in custody, or even when they come home, are there barriers to employment that they face? Those are the things that I believe are necessary, but will definitely take a longer time frame because, we want all hands on deck and to actually push it forward.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to hear that because I'm on paper for 12 more years. And so there are a variety of us that have a lot of time on paper that are, engaged in this work. And I think when I was speaking to Senator James, he was very surprised to learn of not only the amount of time that people are on, but of the fact that you can, I had 15 years. I could do 14. The line I say is I could win 2 Nobel Peace Prizes, get $1 trillion and save a billion babies. On that last day of my, 15 years of paper, I could get revoked and have to do it all over again. Where does that make any sense? And he was kind of just like, nobody's ever done anything about this? I'm like, I don't know, this is a good time to maybe, let's move on, right? No one has, I promise. And so I talk about that, and I talk about how some of us like Adam, who's, managing, human beings at Partners in Hope. We've got Ellie and Ruben, who are managing human beings at their organization, right? Well, Ellie and Ruben are not on paper, but some of us that are on paper, all it takes is one individual that's on your team to have an issue with you. Just call your agent. The level of power they have over any of us in this space is absurd. And so I guess so difficult to take a risk. And I know a lot of us that will just say, I'm just trying to stay low until I'm all done because I don't even want to take that chance. And so it just, so many ways, it is just counterproductive to what we're trying to do. But then we had an interview this last weekend with our 3rd season for Correcting the Narrative, focused on relationships. And we're talking to a woman who had 21 years of paper. She now has, I think, 16 left. She's been out for 5. It's absurd. Yeah, 21 years of paper. What is that? And she, I think, had 5 years in. And her husband has had to get rid of all of his firearms. He was a hunter, that was one. And he also can't produce, which is a hobby of his for a long time, mead. And so you can't have that in the house if you're on paper. So just these other, ancillary aspects of it that I think people don't understand, that don't just prevent the person that's on paper from being bad or whatever the definition would be for that. So going from that, I don't want to get into too much of a conversation that could be partisan and talk about the other side and the difficulties that might be created there. But what do you think needs to happen in Wisconsin for us to start getting some significant measures passed around criminal justice initiatives? I'd say, not even reform.
Honestly, I think at the core of it is people actually taking time to hear the stories across the state, because, unless you are someone that's been impacted by the justice system or someone that's worked in it, it is difficult, and I'm sure Emma can attest this, to explain just the intricacies of what happens, of someone going through the system, how it actually impacts that individual. And then you're also dealing with the, fear of wanting to be safe, right? And sometimes I think the desire to be safe sometimes is coupled with fear. And when there's fear then there's misunderstanding. And so a lot of the issues that we've talked about today really stem from sharing what actually is happening and not just what's portrayed. I think at the heart of it, that's really what it boils down to. I think it's sharing information with our colleagues, across out on any issue, as well as our communities, because again, these people are coming home and they're people just like us, and the only difference between someone that got conviction or someone that didn't is they got caught, So I think that's really the heart of what we need to see in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I agree with Dora. Shannon, I mean, your example a minute ago of talking to a senator who really didn't understand how revocation and reconfinement works. There are 132 legislators. My guess is probably 125 of them don't have any idea of how our supervision system really functions. Maybe that's a little high. Maybe it's like 115 that don't know. So it's an education game. I think the general public don't understand how it works. I think it's easy to just set that aside as different or other than, and to not worry about it, and just to kind of delegate it to somebody else's authority or issue. The two other pieces that I would say is, I always dreamed that we would get this expungement bill passed and that people would not lose their job through, that vote, and people would feel kind of more confident or comfortable working on justice reform, and that would be step one, and then we would take 2 steps forward like 17-year-olds, and then because I think there is not this massive backlash that people are in elected office are afraid of, and then that would build, right? You see a little bit of momentum and a little bit of success on project 1, 2, 3, and then you've built this camaraderie. And I thought maybe too, when we did some juvenile justice stuff a few years ago, that would be a spark, and it just hasn't stuck. The second thing that I wanted to say is there's a million things we need to do, from policing to reentry and everywhere in between. There are literally thousands of different laws that we could tweak or reform or change or undo or create that would make the system better and more fair and more equitable. And what happens a lot is you've got 20 different justice reform advocacy organizations working on 50 different ideas, and very splintered, and it's hard to get agreement and focus. But let me tell you, there's a bill right now that would treat telecommunication companies differently. They wouldn't have to pay property taxes on their equipment and stuff. I promise you, T-Mobile and AT&T and all of these they're normally competitors and adversaries, but they are all focused on the one shared thing that impacts all of their existence. And they are putting money into it and time. And I don't know if they'll win or not, but I just step back and see, man, what if the justice reform effort could have a summer summit this year, and we could do some trust falls, and we could do whatever it takes, right? Just agree, this is the year that 17-year-olds aren't going to be adults anymore, and we're all going to put down our other priorities until Wisconsin joins the rest of the free world in saying 17-year-olds aren't little adults, right? Because when we're all splintered and working on different things, it's, we lose focus. And I'm guilty of that. I mean, I've done that too, because I'm working on 10 different things, and new stuff comes up and it's exciting, but it takes some relentless focus to get something done in Madison.
I could say a lot about that, because it's something that's been very frustrating for me. When I got out, I had this grand delusion of bringing people together and all this stuff, and you kind of get in there and you see like, oh, there's a reason why you're not working with that person. Or there's a reason why those two organizations can't really collaborate. And sometimes there aren't reasons, but they're fabricated reasons. And so it's so complex. And we also have this issue that, like you said, it's not just a couple of things that need to be changed. Like the line that I oftentimes say is that the greatest evidence that there's intelligent life out there is that they've never contacted us. Because we have a system that makes no sense in any way. And it's like, what do you focus on? Like, there's so many things to focus on. And then there's like always a new story coming to you all saying, I have been, this injustice here, like there's another one. So you're right, it is very difficult.
Or another state does something,
Yeah.
right? And then we're compared to them, and they're like, "Oh, if Minnesota could do that, let's," and yes, that's valid. That advocates see something that we want to achieve somewhere else, and that we want to replicate it here, but it just really takes a couple of years of focus and persistence to get legislation across the goal line, enacted and done. And I would love to be a part of some effort to do that and just focus. But it's hard, like you said. It's hard.
Yeah, there's a think tank that me and a couple of folks have been talking about recently to try and hopefully do some of that, to kind of bring a lot of lessons learned. We'll see where that goes. I don't know if I have any more limbs to hold anything up in my life at this moment, but I'm sure I'll try. And so, but yeah, I'll probably follow up with both of you about as we progress with that. I'm curious, very curious to know what you think about and what's going to happen with the gerrymandering aspect in regards to changing some things around the possibility of justice initiatives passing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it will open opportunities to see success on a whole variety of legislation. I mean, there's hundreds of good ideas that are bottlenecked and held back by kind of an unrepresentative legislature. I think that justice reform is likely one major category that faces a decade of success after a decade of defeat if we enact kind of a true 50-50 map. And I don't say that just because it's more Democrats versus more Republicans. It's just kind of more moderated voices and more people looking for areas where there can be bipartisanship. So, you mentioned your conversation with, Senator James from the northwest part of the state. That stuff happens a lot more under a kind of more 50-50. People are more intentional about how do I want to know Dora Drake. She's a Milwaukee Democrat. How do I get to know her? What are her issues? What we want to partner together. And when that happens, it just bears fruit, right? Like it just generates more consensus, and you have less entrenched power structures within the leadership of both caucuses or both parties. And yeah, I mean, it is the key to unlocking a lot of progress.
Yeah. And I should have said redistricting. I feel like the word gerrymandering has like a...
Yeah, but I mean, I know you don't want to fact check yourself,
right.
But I will tell you that it is like a federal court did have a finding that this map was partisan gerrymandering, and it was kind of overturned on other grounds.
Right.
So nobody ever claimed it wasn't a partisan gerrymander. So I think you can comfortably say that. We don't have to edit that part. Okay. But moving forward, we're really talking about we're really talking about redistricting long term, right? Because this isn't just about one map. It's about how do we ensure that for as long as we're doing this work, that it's a fair representation of Wisconsin. Yeah.
The only thing I can add, because he said it out perfectly, it also removes the unnecessary politics of actually addressing criminal justice reform too. And to what Evan shared earlier, the fear of, if I put my name on a bill, how will this be received back at home? Will I seem too soft on crime? And then I have to answer, and I'm not really sure how to answer it. A lot of that will probably dissipate because it's balanced. Yeah. And so there's more room to actually talk policy versus maneuvering in a political sense.
Can I just say one thing as well? I'm going to. It's really southeast Wisconsin too. Okay. The divide between justice reform and kind of tough on crime is really apparent in southeast. And it's racial and economic in Metro Milwaukee, and you can say that about a lot of things. But when you start talking to some of the rural Republicans and even rural Dems, it's just not something that they see in their politics. I was talking to Senator Mary Felskowski, way up there, right, on the UP border. And she's like, you guys are crazy. All the talk show hosts on conservative radio really prioritize it. They don't talk about it up there. She is excited to work on justice reform. The landscape up there is just totally different. And so solve gerrymander, let's do that. That's great. That also we have kind of our own human gerrymander segregated communities here in Metro Milwaukee, and there are organizations, they use faith, they use food, they use workforce to try to break barriers. You're doing it, right? This kind of better, more regionalizing this issue so that we don't have the stark, like you drive into Washington County and all of a sudden there's this deep divide between the politics. And so like even fixing the gerrymander, we still have this really divided Metro Milwaukee that is reflected in Madison politics on this issue, probably more than any other issue.
That's interesting. Yeah, I definitely need to get a better sense of some of that as we go into, I think this year I'm going to be involved a lot more in like advocacy political work, and I have to find out what legally I can do with an organization, lobbying, and what I can just do on my own and not be associated with the nonprofit, so I'm figuring that out. But yeah, I want to make sure I have a good sense of these nuances, because there's a strategy behind a strategy behind a strategy and all this stuff. And so the expungement bill, what do you feel in regards to this time that maybe wasn't there in the past couple of years where you weren't able to get it passed?
Well, we haven't passed it yet. I think one big change is that we, as authors of the bill, decided that we were not going to get any movement in the state Senate right now unless we were willing to make changes to the bill. We had, for 4 previous years, tried to fit a square peg through a round hole and just kind of came up against that brick wall, and we said, we're right, you're wrong, we won't compromise, and we lost. And so I think this time, after seeing that result repeat a couple of times, we thought, this is not going to work. We need to work on some changes. And the original version of this bill, I think we're looking at amending it, and by amending it, I mean, narrowing it. And it was a bill that had some pretty wide implications on both procedure and eligibility. And I think, through an amendment, we would narrow its focus. And by narrowing it, we also narrow its benefit, which is hard to stomach as an author. I don't want to amend my own bill. I want to go the opposite direction. But it's a realization. I think what's different is this realization that if we want to see some progress happen, we have to make changes to the bill. We've done that. We've kind of run it through some folks that are, the prosecutors in other parts of the state that are pretty conservative, and trying to get that kind of buy-in locally for conservative senators that are currently against it. And they're all worried about the optics and talk radio going after them for being soft on crime. And it's not a soft on crime bill, especially after this amendment. It's really not a soft on crime bill. And I probably have some friends that are going to call and say, that I shouldn't have compromised, right? I should have held out longer. But after 11 years of trying to fix this, it's just not working. And so you have to be, you have to be able to take what win you can get.
Take the single.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes that's how you win games. And to also not lose focus on that there are people that will benefit. It isn't just the politics of, I want my bill to win, I want it perfect. Well, there are thousands of people, Grace, who I mentioned earlier, that are sitting there trapped because this procedure won't allow them to ever get back to court. And they can't get a pardon because they're not a felon, right? So they're stuck with their misdemeanor and they're just stuck. So, I gotta, this is hard. It's hard as a lawmaker and elected to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I have a bill that would impact 20,000 people, say. I have to amend it, and now it'll only impact 10,000. It's really easy to consider the difference as a loss rather than to focus on the benefit for the 10. And so, that happens a lot in justice reform movements and advocacy groups. It's really hard. I think Dora and I would probably agree on how many churches or like rooms that I've been in where I just get pummeled by people because what is possible is not perfect. And, often advocates want an immediate wholesale change to the entire system, and it's just not going to happen like that.
So, Dora, as you start to focus on some of these newer bills you're introducing, are there lessons from like what Evan was talking about?
Definitely called them a few times, just in the time that I've been in legislative, just how to navigate it. There are, even if it's doing work in committee, there are some bills that come through the committee. I'm just like, there are some concerns here. We shouldn't be pushing this through. And then politics gets in the way. So it's like, okay, well, how do you navigate that? And in terms of, just lessons I've heard from Evan and the time he's been a legislator, I've purposely moved in a way where I want to make sure that the work I do is bipartisan. It is so easy, I think. I would love to just put bills out there and just say, this is what should be done, worked on, but if that means me delaying a little bit in order to make sure like there's this good, solid core group of legislators that are willing to push it and that there's community support behind it, then that takes a little bit longer, and that is more frustrating, because I think to everyone's point here, we want to see change, in the justice system, and I think we like it sooner rather than later because we know how great the impact will be for so many people. But I want to ensure that any type of work, whether it's, free hygiene products, address supervision, and I forgot to mention how virtual reality can even be used as a tool. I think can be really successful for people coming back home and not feeling so out of the loop. It takes time, and even though there's a benefit to publicly sharing what needs to happen, that's the educational piece we talked about earlier, I think is absolutely key that it has to be bipartisan from the start. Otherwise, then now you're trying to battle, partisanship and politics unnecessarily or more than you may have had to.
To kind of switch a little bit here, you obviously hate the people that you represent because you're leaving your job. And so,
seeking to represent more people, technically. So I just
A lot of love.
and so, just curious, what kind of pushed, motivated you to make that potential change?
Yeah,
Nothing's
And
changed yet.
yeah, I haven't won yet. I think I long for an opportunity to see more tangible results for the time and effort that I put into my job. I have really loved being in the legislature. I like it. I would stay there for longer. I'm not leaving because of money or the commute, although I look forward to more money and less commute. But the truth is, if the legislature were more fulfilling, meaning if this was a conversation and your questions were like, wow, Evan, how did you get all of those things passed, rather than tell us the story of how all of those ideas failed, I think I'd probably be staying. And so the job that I'm seeking, it kind of has a more local Milwaukee-centric focus, and I'm hoping that we're sitting here on historic Mitchell Street, and my goal is that we're working together on projects to rebuild this community and others. And the way that the city attorney's office, the position I'm running for, is able to connect with the type of work you're doing in this space and with others of rebuilding communities and working on public safety initiatives through healing people and giving them help as they return home, and just support and mentorship and all this. So I think I can be more impactful is what I'm trying to say.
And so, I kind of look at you, Dora, as, I guess, a torchbearer or somebody like taking on a lot of the work that Evan's been doing. And there's a couple folks, I think, in that position as well in the legislature. And so I guess my question is kind of twofold. One, how do you feel about that, or do you even look at it that way? And two, what kind of concerns you going forward?
Yeah. Well, one, I think it's an honor to be seen that way. Because again, I ran for office because of the experiences I saw, not just my own life, but people that were coming from home, and literally, and this is a true story, this individual, he made a living off writing books, and he came home, he came to the Center for Self-Sufficiency, that's where I was working at the time, and he showed me the paperwork that his PO shared with him. It's like, one of your conditions was you can't write. And I was like, that can't be real. And I looked at the paper and I said that. And so, to be the torchbearer is an honor. And I think maybe a concern, but a realization I already knew, was that it would be a long process, a long journey. I think anyone that gets involved or is passionate about criminal justice reform knows that it's not something that you get into lightly. I do think that you are called to, work in that space because of how much it can weigh, on an individual, whether it's someone that's been impacted, someone that knows the story. And again, just knowing, the impact that you can make, and then maybe even some of the things that I may have to step back in order to get something done. And so I'm excited, and I'm also aware that it's always good to seek wisdom from people that came before me. So I'm excited to carry the torch and move forward in that.
You're not getting away.
I'm not dying. I mean, I care about the outcome of these things, right? Our community will be bettered for them, and so I'm not dying. I want to keep my involvement, and maybe I'll be a board member of your think tank, although I'll probably retract that offer after the cameras are
We do have the title of this podcast episode, though. Evan's not dying.
Yeah, there you go. That's good. That's good.
It's gonna be.
Well, all jokes aside, it's something that I know I have a special niche in. I'm the only one in the legislature that's actually worked in pretrial. So the battle around pretrial service alone is going to be a long one because we took 10 steps back just in the last 2 years. So more power to the course for that.
I guess the last question for both of you is kind of broad. Is there anything you want people to know about criminal justice initiatives, reform? I keep using initiatives because recently somebody that found that language resonates with more people. Reform kind of has become a bit of a stay away word. So,
Shannon, one thing that I've always appreciated about you and your approach is that you don't lose sight that there are victims and people get hurt, and we have an imperfect system of accountability. I think too often justice reform initiatives and their advocates.
Whatever you want to call it.
That's fine. That's fine. It works. It
why I
works.
keep
Yeah,
using it.
I get it. I think sometimes we lose sight of that, and we can't, because it is an important and honest and true side of the story, and there's a lot of violence and harm that happens, and the system sometimes perpetrates that harm and continues that harm, and we need to fix it. But we can't. When Dora was just saying a minute ago, I remember when I was a new legislator, and there was a bill on mandatory minimums for drunk driving deaths, and I think I voted against. But at the public hearing, the only people that came to testify were the parents of a young woman who died, and they had her picture and her ashes in front of us. It's really hard. I mean, honestly, it's really hard. Everyone was just bawling at the loss of life and the grief and the pain, and then you vote no. That's really hard to be in that room, and we can't forget that victims are people, often the same people, right? I mean, there's a lot of correlation with people that offend and reoffend and victims, and I just think that humanity is so important to keep, and we want to attach it to people on the inside and coming home, but we also need to attach it to the victims too. And I find no inconsistency with doing that and being for initiatives that let people out earlier or off paper earlier or get second chances. It's just often missing from our conversation.
I think to add to that, it really boils down to making sure people have a chance of redemption and reconciliation, right? There's redemption for someone that did the wrong, and then there's reconciliation and the person that was harmed. And I think if we really focus on that, then we would be able to balance the tension of making sure our victims are supported, and get the justice they deserve, while still making sure people aren't punished for life. I think that is a balance that we can achieve.
And there's complexity there, as Dora was saying. It's not easy. Yesterday I took 2 hours of what we refer to as PTO, which is parental time off. And I actually was walking in the woods up the Milwaukee River with a friend of mine who's a public defender, and so we're talking about his cases and the votes and the job and just the justice system in general. And you got to have a healthy outlet of some sort. I can't tell you how valuable an hour out in the woods was. I think that any person working in this space, whether they're an advocate for their loved one who's in, or they're Shannon trying to hold together coalitions and help, or an elected official, the justice system, it's not a happy place. There's a lot of trauma, a lot of suffering, a lot of people that live on the margins or off the margins, and I think Dora was mentioning it in her response earlier. You got to go in eyes wide open and ready to take some of that, and you also need to not take all of it. You can't save I mean, if every letter that I get from somebody who's in custody, they're all heartbreaking. I want to help everybody. You just cannot, you got to focus on what you can change and focus on it relentlessly until you've changed it, but you just can't get overwhelmed. And it's hard. That's a real hard battle. I'm sure you deal with it too. Just it's heavy.
And if I think I could add to it too, I think what helps is realizing that we are a human too. And I think in being limited, just as much as it's frustrating, I think it's also gracious, is because it lets me know that this work will still continue whether I'm here or not. And so I know that I can do whatever I can in this moment now, and I know that there will always be someone behind me coming to pick up the torch and carrying it.
The conversation reminds me of, so when I took philosophy class, which was arguably the worst class I ever took, but there was an analogy in there that I thought was this wonderful commentary on the decisions that we all make in life, and especially in this conversation. There is this train going down a track, and if you don't do anything, you're the only one that can control, like you're the only one in the train. And if you don't do anything, it's going to go down this track, and it's going to take out, I think, an innocent child right on the track. Or you can pull the lever, actually the other way around. It's 5 like adults. It's going to take out 5 adults. Or you can pull the lever and avoid the 5 adults and kill 1 innocent child. Like a lot of times in life, that's what it is. Like you're deciding between the better of 2 terrible options. And like you have to be able to know that. And the more people I think understand that that's what, policy, and that's what a lot of these leadership positions are, instead of like, good and evil, bad and good decision, it's so much more complex. I think that would make it a lot easier for all of us in this space to be like, not have the heaviness, the double arrow. Like the first arrow was the actual work, and the second one is like, oh, I'm also a terrible person at the same, cool, that's great. That makes it even easier to do this job, right? So, man,
I mean, there are some terrible people in elected office. I genuinely believe most of the members of the state legislature are not that.
Yeah.
Some of them are, but a small minority, and it's not unique to Republicans. There are some terrible Democrats, and they're all people. They're all reachable and movable, and we can teach them, and we can inspire them, and we can, I think my thing is like, in the world of politics, by definition, there's not one person driving that train. Mm-hmm. And it is accessible and achievable. People that get into advocacy shouldn't think that attending one town hall will necessarily change, the outcome of one bill or not. But look, I told you earlier, Grace, Florida, she's got like 8 family members who this week have committed to talking to their electeds, and I'm sure that their friends and their family will do the same. So one person, one phone call, one issue, 8 contacts becomes 16 contacts, becomes 32. And so, I mean, get on, help us make the right choices, don't be intimidated by the system, even though it's designed to be intimidating to keep people away. And I think you've seen this over your years in this, Shannon, is you can connect with people. You can, if you try, you can get some direct contact, and I think most legislators are pretty reasonable once you can sit down and talk to them.
There was one of the first clientels I had. Both of them had the same charge. I think they were facing a disorderly conduct, a misdemeanor charge of some sort, and it was how they moved through the justice system was drastically different. One was a black man. He was probably just trying to find work. I think he had work, your basic job. Had a public defender, and his case lasted probably at least 6 months, more closer to a year, maybe 2 years. Another individual, he was a white man. He was a professional golfer. I didn't believe him at the time because we had to ask for verification of employment, and he wouldn't give it to me. But because of his access to funds, he was able to hire a private attorney. He was able to go before the court and have all his conditions, reduced drastically than what they were before. And his case was done in like 3 months. And so because of my experience that I've seen, yes, we write law, right? And, the law's a law, but we have attorneys and judges that interpret it. And so with that interpretation, there is, it can be subjective. And I think that's why we have to be aware that yes, the law's a law, but we can't ignore the implications that it can happen due to other things that we can't legislate, right? Like, how people feel going through the system, whether it's racism, sexism, your status of socioeconomic, access to funds, like all of that plays into that. And if we ignore it, then we actually, I think, do more harm than good.
Yeah, I think my initial reaction is it's total bullshit. It's something that somebody tells themselves because that's how they are handling the heavy, right? The weight of decisions. I mean, I'm not a police officer. I think it's a really heavy decision of whether or not to put handcuffs on somebody and put them in the squad car. I have been the witness to crime where an officer decides to do that, and I've been a witness to crime where they decided to let people go with a warning or whatever. I've been ticketed, I've been given a warning. That's a heavy choice, but to say that it's an unemotionless response to the kind of cut and dry laws, to ignore that it's a human system, and in the fact that human beings are necessarily executing the legal system, then it'll always be full of emotion, and our biases and the way we look at the world will come through our eyes, and it will determine the outcomes. I mean, it's just not true. You know, you sometimes hear there's a Supreme Court, and there's a famous, they'll be like, we just call the balls and strikes, we define the strike zone. Bullshit. That's just a cute way of saying we're gonna call it like we see it, right? We bring our own ideology and preferences, and we're gonna find a way to get to the decision that we want. And so to think that the system is divorced of that emotion is not true, because it's a human system. And I've seen judges tee off and bank someone and max them because they're pissed, because the judge was angry, and maybe they were angry at the individual, or maybe they were angry at somebody else, but their emotion came into that courtroom and was taken out on somebody. And I've seen judges give no time or a probationary sentence when the prosecutor's asking for prison because the opposite emotion happened, right? Because whether it was the storytelling or the advocacy of the attorney inspired the judge to believe in the person and give them a different outcome. So yeah, I don't think that's remotely possible or true. And probably, I mean, we have to keep putting guardrails on the system so that system actors are not using the wrong motivations like race and class and everything. But it would be a much worse system if all it was automated ins and outs, and if you did this, then this happens. And I don't think that would be a very fair system.
Since we shot this episode, Evan won the election for Milwaukee City Attorney, and Dora is slated to become a state senator on August 7th, due to a special election to fill a vacancy. But she faces an almost immediate second election for the seat August 30th in order to hold it for 4 years. Also, since this episode was recorded, the expungement and ERP bills both failed to pass, but the Reentry Center bill did pass, becoming the most significant reform legislation in the past 2 decades in Wisconsin. It was essentially written by and pushed for several years by Adam Procell, a formerly incarcerated person who was the first guest of this season. Later this year, a group of us formerly incarcerated humanizers, advocates, leaders, activists, etc. are coming together to try and create a coalition to strategize around some long-term and short-term issues, as Evan mentioned, and have a similar message that we will push and promote. One of those issues will be capping supervision in Wisconsin, a topic I talk more about with Cecilia Klingel in our episode next week. Getting more involved in politics and policy worries me, to say the least, but we need to be doing this work, and I found that our group has a bit of a penchant for it. However, I also realize how connected these issues are, globally and nationally, regarding legal system work, and I worry about getting pulled into too many fights that I either don't know enough about, or that will create barriers to being heard and seen by decision makers we need to reach on the prison and justice issue. So wish me peace and give me grace in this new venture, and always share your feedback. Thank you for listening. Peace.